I'm going to turn things over to Andrew now to introduce Lisa, and then she will be taking over. Oh.
Hello, Lisa, thanks for joining us. Welcome to our Coachella Valley folks. We're glad you're here too.
Thank you.
Lisa is a nature photographer and birder from the age of 8. She's the founder of Langell Photography LLC. Her website is langellphotography.com. She started her business in 2010 after a long, vibrant career as a floral designer, educational psychologist, consultant, and helping launch and manage 2 startups that grew into leading companies in the ed tech space. Since then, she has earned numerous awards and has been published in Outdoor Photographer, Arizona Highways, Ranger Rick, more. She is an image master for Tamron Americas and an ambassador for Photo Pro tripods and is a judge for ViewBug. Lisa loves creating nature photography and art that is inspired by her background in psychology and design. When Lisa isn't having fun making photographs, she's thriving on teaching photography, both via engaging online webinar-based classes and her in-the-field sessions. She specializes in Alaska, Florida, Arizona, and beyond. Her humility and passion for teaching and photography shines through. Lisa provides photographers with memorable, fun, and caring experiences that enrich, invigorate, and expand photographer skills and portfolios in many ways. Lisa, thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for those who braved the weather to come in person and in the presentation room. And thanks for those who are online as well. I'm looking forward to tonight's session because I really do think these rules need to be broken. So I'm going to be talking about 5 different rules. And I'm going to add in one more that I feel need to be broken, need to be thought through and rethought as far as how we approach our photography. But most of all, I want this to be fun. I want you to get a lot out of it. I love people when they ask questions. Feel free and type those questions in the chat window. And then at the end of the session, I'll be glad to have a discussion if anybody wants to unmute themselves at that time. And we will get started. And I see a few familiar faces in the room, and it's just good to see you. I know we're not in person, but it's good to see your faces. So thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it. I am going to share my screen and we will get this party started. So there we go. All right. And I also will put in the chat window, if you see me looking this way, it's because I have 2 monitors going, and I will put in the chat window my information. And if anybody is interested, you can join my newsletter. It is free. I don't send a ton of email. You're not going to get bombarded in your inbox. I'm not going to send anybody a bunch of spam or sell your information, but it is the best way to get notified of any of the upcoming workshops or events or online things that I'm doing, webinars and so forth by getting on that newsletter. I email everybody on my mailing list first, and often everything sells out before I ever have the chance to put it out there publicly. So that's your best bet if you want to join me on any of these events. There's free things, there's paid things, and everything in between. But anyhow, let's go ahead and talk about breaking these rules, these 6 rules that I've put together. And I really feel rethinking these things when you're breaking these rules is going to help you augment your photography in different ways. And as I talk to you about them, there's something important I want to say. I'm not saying throw out the rules that you've been abiding by. That's not what I mean. But what I'm saying is augment them, go in an additional direction. Sort of like, I imagine most of us in the room speak English as the native language. But maybe you then add French or Spanish or Italian or German or whatever other language you want to learn. You're adding to your repertoire. You're not throwing out English to learn something else. So that's kind of how I feel about these subjects tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. As a little bit of background about me, and I'll keep this short because I already had a lovely introduction, and thank you for that. Just a couple of quick things. I'm originally from Michigan, but lived in Scottsdale for over 20 years. I've been a bird watcher since I was 8 years old, and I can honestly say birding has taken me on quite a journey that ended up being this wonderful photographic journey as well. I've had a camera in my hand since I was 8 years old. I've loved photography since then. But as was already mentioned, I was a formal floral designer for 15 years. I'm going to tie into that as we get into our discussion tonight. And I also have been an educational psychologist. Birds have changed my life, and I won't get into the whole story tonight, but honestly, birds have been the vehicle by which I have had multiple careers and ended up being a full-time professional photographer for 11 years, and including part-time career, it's been 16 years, and I don't know where the time went, honestly. It has gone so fast. But what I value in photography, everybody values different things about photography. And for me, I really love creating emotionally evocative photographs. I love things that take your breath away and make you feel something, not just see something. I really like breaking rules and boundaries and certainly preserving ethics along the way. I'm not a rebel rule breaker. I'm just let's push these boundaries a little bit. Let's question why we use these rules. And that was part of the reason of how I came up with tonight's presentation. I like thinking beyond traditional conventions. I really like developing creativity in myself and in others. If any of you have been on a workshop of mine or taken a class of mine, you know that I try to nudge people in different ways, and I really try to tap into how you can develop your creativity. My photo artistry workshops, which are a specific series of workshops of all the things that I run, really tap into that creativity aspect. And if you're interested, I have one coming up in New Mexico in January of 2027 that will be releasing for sale shortly. You'll get notifications about that if you join my newsletter. But developing your creativity is really something I feel passionately about and really love helping people with. And I love expanding the purpose and utility of our photographs. I always think about where is this image going to live, and I want to try to get images to live in more places. And so as we go along, I'll be giving you some tips on that. And I enjoy teaching and inspiring others. So for tonight, what I want to do is tell you about the rules I want you to start breaking and why. And I want you to be able to consider how you're going to break them and come up with some ideas along the way for doing that in the future. I'll give you examples of that. And then one last very important rule I want everybody to not break. So we're going to cover multiple rules, but there is one that we should never break. And then some questions and discussion, and we're going to have a good time. And so for me, it all started here. And it's kind of an unusual way to start, but it started here with rule number 6, deleting bad images. This is not the rule that I had planned on telling you, but when I really got started thinking about all this, it all kind of came back to this for me, and that was deleting bad images. This is a rule I'd love for people to change. And I know it's not a hard, steadfast rule, but it's a widely adopted rule. So I have a question, and feel free and type in the chat window for those that are in the Zoom rooms. Go ahead and type in the chat window. Do you delete images as you photograph? So, for example, you go out in the field, you might take a couple hundred images, and then when you get a minute, you stop and look through them and delete in camera the images that weren't any good. How many of you do that? Type yes or no in the chat window. And for the people that are in the classroom, just raise your hand and someone can be the representative for giving me that number as well.
No one is raising their hand.
Very impressive. Very impressive.
Oh, one person.
One. All right. I was gonna say it's odd to get
We'll have
complete.
to change it better.
That's all right. I was just saying it's unusual to get complete a unanimous response one direction or another with this. So that was impressive. All right, and we're getting some responses in the chat window as well. And thank you so much for responding. I do these webinars quite frequently, and all of my webinars, I try to get some interaction involved with questioning the audience about different things and getting your opinions and some groups are very responsive and some are not at all. And it's always so much harder when nobody types anything. So hats off to you. You're a good group. I already love you guys and thank you for doing that. All right. So we have a pretty split when I look at the answers. It is quite literally pretty split between the yeses and the nos. I would say it's 50-50. And so in the classroom, we have what was kind of your total synopsis there? How many said yes versus no?
I'm gonna say one yes and
Okay.
two yeses and maybe 10, what, one, two, 11 no's.
Okay. All right. So we got about 50-50 online and two yeses and 11 no's or so. Excellent. Okay. And the reason why I asked that, it is a common thing for people to go in, delete the images as they're going along and shooting. We've all done it at some point, but I want to explain something that might be helpful for you. So some people will delete when they're on the computer. They've downloaded the images, go through all their millions of files and delete the images that they don't like. Some people do it in camera because it feels more efficient. Um, I'm not going to get into what your criteria are for doing so, but I wanted to give some insights for you to help you understand maybe a better way of doing things. So, deleting in camera versus on your computer. If you delete in camera, meaning deleting off the memory cards, that can actually, according to the manufacturers, corrupt your images. And I put hard drive. We don't typically shoot on cameras with, installed hard drives, although that would be very cool. But in the memory cards, it can potentially corrupt your memory cards. And so how it works is this. So let's pretend this is a memory card. And all of these are little storage cells for pictures. And you go on and you take your picture, and the first picture takes up that many cells, and the second one that many, and the third one, and the fourth one, and fifth, and so on and so on. And then you stop at some point after taking all these images, and you start to take a look, and you're like, it's time to take a look and decide what I like and don't like. So when you do that, maybe you delete that picture out because you didn't like that one. And then you take that one out, and that one out, and that one out, and so on. And then once you delete, you start shooting again. And the new pictures have to fill in those spaces. So the new one goes in, and maybe it's only that much of file size. Because you may or may not realize it, but every picture you take takes up a different amount of space on your hard drive or on your memory card, excuse me. So there's the next picture, and then the next one, and then the next one. And notice how this little cell here didn't get filled in. There's another picture and another, and this one had to get stored across three different areas, and so on and so forth. Well, what happens with that is your images can get potentially corrupted. And when that happens, um, your card, when you go to download, is not going to necessarily transfer all the images, or the images that you're going to transfer can not look right or literally have missing information, like it isn't even a picture, or it's something with a lot of colorful lines in it, like it just looks like a mistake. And this is information from the card manufacturers, but I tend to trust what they say, at least in those cases, and I don't want to risk it. And I've had it happen. We have all been there when we delete in camera because, in my instance, sometimes I grab a couple cards and I, go walking out in the field, and all of a sudden something crazy happens, and I shot way more images than I was planning to. And now, you're trying to go and delete a few out of there at the end so you can fit a few more images in because the light's really good and the subject's there, and you don't have time to go back to your car or whatever it might be. We've all had those moments. But I just want you to be aware that all of that can be corrupted. So what I recommend is to go into your hard drive and download all of those images first, then back them up, however you back them up. And then when you go to delete off the hard drive on your computer and be really certain you want to delete them. Because what I have also found when I download things from my card onto my computer and they go into the hard drives, and sometimes after the first few glances at those images, I don't really come back to them for a long time. But I have found that two things happen. One is that future software makes it easier or better to edit those images. So, for example, I used to shoot with a Canon 7D camera. Like this is back in like 2010 or so, Canon 7D. And then I eventually upgraded to the Canon 7D Mark II. And with the 7D back in the day, I didn't like pictures that were over ISO 400. So if my ISO was pushed very much higher than that in order to capture the shot, I just knew I wasn't going to like it. And most often, I would just opt out of the picture. I'm like, it's not going to look good, so why do I want to take it? And then I got the 7D Mark II, and I didn't love those images beyond about ISO 800. And it was my personal taste. Some people may push it further, but for me, I didn't like it. So when I had to shoot at ISOs over 800, which sounds unfathomable to me today, but I opted myself out of a lot of scenes that I wouldn't like because the ISOs were too high for my taste, and I didn't bother shooting them. I wish so badly I would have captured some of those images now because future software makes it easier to denoise these images. So, lessons learned the hard way. And you also gain new skills editing over time. And so, some of those pictures may not be pictures you can edit today the way you want to, but in 2 or 3 years, you might have a totally different skill set, or there's new augmentations to software that make it a lot easier. And so I encourage you to shoot freely, and then I encourage you to be very careful about what you delete because we can now recover those poor images, reduce the noise in those images, and we can apply our future learning to editing in ways that we didn't currently think was possible. I mean, look at generative fill and content aware fill. I mean, those were revolutionary things when they came out. And now you can get rid of something and fill it in with the grass in the background or whatever you want to do with it. It just makes it incredibly easy. So we need to break that rule. And this wasn't even a rule I was going to talk about, except this is a rule that I actually think is really important. And breaking the rule isn't purely to avoid memory card issues. It really is about deleting bad, and I use that in air quotes, images, because there may be things you can do with them later. So here is an example of what I think is a pretty bad image. It's a really sunny day. It's hazy, hot, dusty in Arizona. It's almost noon. If you look at the shadows, they're pretty close to being right underneath this subject. The subject is hazy. The sky is really bright. It's not even pretty as a high key image. It just is a bad image. But in proving my point about deleting bad images, if I would have deleted that out, I could have never created something with it down the road. And so I came back to this image years later and I say, let's not delete them. So if I look at the original image, this is a pretty hazy situation. And we've got some side lighting here, a little bit of side lighting slash backlighting. It's not pretty. That part's overexposed. But if I take that image and then I'm going to tell you some quick directions, we can mask it by selecting the subject, which is the saguaro, increasing the dehaze on that, because we have dehaze tools now we didn't have years ago, increase the texture on it, increase the contrast on it, and then we can add a new mask with a brush and do some things to this saguaro. And we can apply things like contrast, dehaze, texture. We can touch on some of the plants down here to bring out a bit more darkness and texture in it and just kind of give it new life. And so if this is the before, this is the after. I'm still not done, but this is the after the treatments that I described on this screen. So we went from this to this. All right, so I gave it a little bit more grungy look. Now, what I have in mind looking at that light background is here's the before, by the way, and here's the after in more detail. So it's a lot more crunchy. I wouldn't print it this way. I am getting to a place where I'm ready to print it, but I've brought some of that texture back. All right, so now what I want to do is take this texture. So this is, I think it was a stone wall. This part in the middle has been smoothed out. I'm going to apply that over my image. And now I have this lovely saguaro that really kind of showcases the parched feeling in Arizona. It's, you can see the saguaro because I've enhanced the contrast and kind of punched it up a little bit. And then this texture kind of just gives me some depth in the sky and it just creates this scene that I wouldn't have done normally. And I think that could be really cool, especially if you did it as a series with different cacti or different desert plants. It might be really interesting to see how that looked as a series and hang it on the wall. I think it's beautiful. It may or may not fit for competition depending on what categories you're entering it in, but there is more places to put our image than a competition, and I think this would be awesome on the wall. Okay, hopefully that's making a little bit of sense for you. So for rule number 5, this is another one that I'm really keen on breaking, and this is a little easier one than going back through archives and reprocessing images. But I have found so often that we use these standard aspect ratios for wildlife, nature, even portraits, architecture, and so forth. And I really think it's time we break this rule more often. It's often felt to me like being a little bit avant-garde to break some of these rules, but let's get into why. And I'm going to start this with a little history, a little trivia for you tonight. So, can anybody tell me, and feel free and use the chat room, how did we start using 4 by 3 aspect ratios? Does anybody know?
480,
What?
480 pixels by,
No, she's saying why did we start using that ratio?
Yeah, it's a
Some
very
old,
common ratio.
some,
Yeah.
some old camera had it.
All right, I see someone saying here, film, and you're saying some old camera had it, which both of you are not wrong. So this did start out as film. And the interesting thing is, this is an aspect ratio we use quite a bit. And I'm just giving you a picture that is in that aspect ratio. Quite a bit it's used. And the interesting thing is this contraption is actually where 35 millimeter film got started. And in the late 1890s, William Kennedy Dixon, an employee of Thomas Edison, who Thomas Edison actually grew up part of his childhood in the town next to the town that I grew up in Michigan. That's a little side little trivia for you, but he was an employee of Thomas Edison and he was developing a forerunner to the movie projector, and that's what this looked like. And so he decided that an image height of 4 perforations on 35 millimeter film gave the ideal shape, and that became the standard for film and TV for decades. So one random dude decided this, and this is the standard that we've operated off of for decades. And I found that very interesting. And so that is how we got to 4 by 3 because it came from 35 millimeter film and the little perforations that you see here. So with 4 by 3, let's play a little more trivia history. How about 4 by 5? Does anybody know how that got started? And this all distills to a point in a few moments, but we're just seeing what people might know from the photography archives, so to speak.
8 by 10 sheet film.
8 by 10 film.
8 by 10 sheet film. I'm liking this group. And Darcy said slides, so that could be another option. All
That
right.
was Andrew.
I love it. I love it. So, 4 by 5. Well, let's look at the history. So, 4 by 5, which are aspect ratios like 8 by 10 and 16 by 20, those came from large format film. So, there we go. The large format cameras would capture images as 8 by 10 or 16 by 20. Why? Well, here's also, just leading into the answer with this, a magazine cover, also typically shot in 4 by 5. And if you submit magazine images, magazines always have those requirements for their vertical images to be in that size. And magazines have a little bit of play with the trim size in their magazines, but for the most part, that's a pretty standard submission, 8 by 10. And so what's interesting about that, I'm going to come back to this a little bit more with this 8 by 10 or 16 by 20. There's one more thing where 4 by 5 is actually from, and that's that early photographic film came in sheets, and I think Andrew alluded to this, came in sheets often in sizes like 16 by 20. So if the film was printed in that, if you needed pictures smaller than that, you didn't want to waste the film, so you'd trim them down into sizes that were standard and sizes that wouldn't waste any film. which then became 8 by 10. If I take 16 by 20 and have it, it's 8 by 10. And of course, you can go to 4 by 6 and all the other, or excuse me, 4 by 5 aspect ratios, all of those iterations. You're not wasting film, you're not leaving paper on the floor, you are maximizing it. It was an efficiency standard. And so when we do this and we shoot in those aspect ratios, that is all the way back to, 1800s, early 1900s when we were getting into being efficient with our photography. And so those larger format cameras, even micro four thirds cameras, also use that aspect ratio. And that aspect ratio then dictated the magazine aspect ratio because if we're going to take pictures in that size, we better print a magazine in that size. And so this sort of was the tail that wagged the dog for magazine standards. And so, even a little more history for you is 3 by 2. And many of our cameras today shoot in 4 by 5 or 4 by 3 or 3 by 2 aspect ratios. And if they don't natively shoot in it, some of our mirrorless cameras today, you can actually change the aspect ratio in what you shoot in. But it's typically these things. One that I sometimes see in addition to this now, especially with cell phones, is square crop or 16 by 9. So we would add those to the mix as well. But how did we start using 3 by 2? Well, traditional aspect ratios and 3 by 2, such as this picture. If you remember the 35 millimeter film, which was 4 by 3, and if you took that film and put it side by side, merge those two together, let's get rid of the little line in between. That ends up being 3 by 2, and that was what was deemed at the time to be an ideal landscape aspect ratio. So there you go. And I find it funny because I don't see it as the ideal landscape aspect ratio. I particularly love wide panel style aspect ratios, 10 by 20, 16 by 9, even things like 10 by 25. I love those wide or even tall and narrow shots. But that's where that originally came from, and that was deemed as ideal for landscapes. Who deemed it that? I do not know. But when we take all of those, and we start looking at the magazines. There's 3 by 2 for a 2-page spread. These are some magazines that I was published in a while ago. There's another one here, 3 by 2 for the 2-page spread, 3 by 2 for a 2-page spread with the coyote. This one is not a 3 by 2, but it's almost a full page spread, except we did a little narrower because they needed to put some article stuff over here. We'll come back to this picture later on in this presentation. All right, here we go again with the 8 by 10 aspect ratio. This was Outdoor Photographer magazine where I had the cover and a multi-page spread in that. There's the 3 by 2 aspect ratio, 2-page spread. And even a little bit more here, although it's a little shrunken because they put article around it. All right, so my point in all of this is that the aspect ratios were dictated by the tools that we use, the cameras and the film. And then the magazines adopted that so that they could start publishing those things. Frames then became standard in 8 by 10 and 11 by 14 and on 4 by 6 and so forth because the prints were standard. I just spoke at a camera club earlier today here in Arizona, and they happened to be doing a print competition, and they had all these mat boards stacked up, and they were all 8 by 10s. And we got talking about this because this does not happen often. They wanted the same topic today as you did. So this is the second time today I've talked about this. But those dimensions early on originated from film photography. So why am I bringing all of this up? Well, the thing is we've kind of gotten stuck in this standard. The cameras are built around these standards. These prints today are built around these standards. Well, if the magazines, think back through it, the magazines are the things that many people have made lots of money with over the years by getting their images printed and published. That today is eroding pretty quickly now. Magazines, they're still there, but not nearly in the volume, and the images, they don't pay nearly enough. When I did an outdoor photographer spread, and outdoor photographer, by the way, has went, belly up, and then it's sort of having a second life right now. It just recently got restarted again. But I wrote I think it was a 2,200 word article, and I had, I think 5 or 6 pages of pictures and the cover. And all of that together paid $1,600 before you pay any tax or overhead or insurance or anything else out of that. You can't make a living off of that. And so, even if you are getting published, it doesn't pay much. And so I highly encourage breaking this rule. Because if we're printing and shooting for magazines and the requirements for magazines are such that there are things, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but filling the frame, for example, that's great for a magazine. It is not great necessarily for an interior photograph that's going into a living room or an office or a hotel. So even things like this here, we're going to talk about this picture. That is a great picture for, and I'm speaking of the bird here, great picture for this magazine, not a great picture in other places. So these traditional aspect ratios, just giving you the subtle size difference between all of them. And they're 16 by 9, which I love 16 by 9 if the composition works well for it. But these aspect ratios, it's just not where it's at anymore, in my opinion, at least not entirely. And so when we're using standard film and sensor sizes and the magazines are, following suit with the cameras and the frames that we, buy at the store to put our pictures in are following suit with the cameras, there's a nice little continuity there. But the problem is we got started with these rules a lot because the magazines would be printing photos. And we need to break that rule because magazines anymore aren't so much of a thing. We have other places that images can go now. We have images that can go in social media, advertisements. We can print them on, and hang them on the wall. We can make tapestries with them. We can print them on sheets. We can make blankets out of them. We can make drapes out of them. We can do so many things. I had some of my high key hummingbird pictures that I sent to a friend of mine, and she sent them in and had fabric printed and sent me back a handmade handbag with those hummingbirds on fabric. It was gorgeous. So there's so many other ways that we can get images printed and used that aren't for magazines and calendars, yet a lot of our rules and requirements still follow magazine and calendar rules. So it's just interesting to me. So these standard aspect ratios really need to be augmented with a lot of different options. There's more places beyond magazines and calendars and social media for your photography to live today. For example, web banners, advertising, interior decor, fine art, product art. This picture is an example of a lawyer's office. This is the conference room. We did other rooms as well, where I did some custom work for them and hung it on the wall. This is an 8 foot wide metal print, which is about as wide as you can print a single sheet of metal anywhere. I haven't found a place that prints any wider than 8 feet. So this is an 8 foot long print. I had to color grade the sky to match this tone of blue. So I realize this is much lighter, but it's in the same family of blue. It's not, an aqua blue. It's this same tone of blue. And these saguaros were color graded to match the kind of the taupey tones in the room. And so it wasn't a big adjustment from this picture, but I did customize it. But now here we go. This is not in a magazine aspect ratio at all. It's not in the standard frame aspect ratio at all. It is something completely different, but I am putting images in rooms like this. And I'm not saying you have to go and sell people your images, but it's just an example of where else things can go. And so, what I encourage you doing to break this rule is, and this is by no means a great image, I'm just using it as a demo here. But when you go out and shoot, the next event you do, the next thing you do in your backyard, wherever you go, when you go out and shoot, I want you to think in advance. I'm going to shoot something as a wide aspect ratio, pano style crop. I don't mean you have to go and shoot a multi-stitch pano. You can, but just an example, this is a one frame here, and this is what it looked like looking through my camera. But I composed this in my mind and in my camera because I knew afterwards I wanted to crop the bottom half or third of that off because that is really the tree that I wanted to emphasize. I cropped this as a 10 high by 22 wide image. That looks beautiful. That doesn't look beautiful. It's first of all, it's not completely processed. Second of all, there's way too much foreground. But I go in advance and think of the crop that I might want to do. And then I shoot for that. And I leave room so I can crop some of that extra out. And then I might look at something with this tree and go, well, what could I do if it was a vertical? What could I do if my client wanted a square crop? What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I start shooting it in have the hiccups. I'm so sorry. I start shooting it in different ways for different potential places where it'll live. But that's the one that I really like the best for this one. Here's a red-throated loon, cropped the same aspect ratio, 10 by 22. That's what worked in that picture, not the abundance of white in the foreground and background. I didn't need all that. In fact, that looked wrong, but cropping it this way looked absolutely right. But I'm going in ahead of time, filling that frame widthwise and knowing that I'm going to crop intentionally on the top and the bottom and not trying to make this an 8 by 10 aspect ratio by cropping, something like this in here. I wanted the longer body. I love the little water droplets and all of that. So I'm imagining ahead of time what I want it to look like when I crop. And that's something that I don't see very many people doing. Here's another 10 by 22, and that looks beautiful over a dining room table. It's wide enough, it's tall enough that it feels balanced, but not too tall. And those are the things that I think about is where is it going to live? Either I know it where it's going to live or I'm imagining where it could live, but I try to shoot for that instead of just looking through my camera and using the rectangle that my camera gives me to compose. I find there's a lot more latitude and creativity when you think of alternative aspect ratios from the get-go and then try to shoot in those different aspect ratios. Here's another one that was 10 by 20. This is a boathouse. And I know that if I submitted this for competition, I mean, they might like it, but I know one of the concerns might be all the negative space. And I also know that people would look at this and go, this is definitely not a shot to go vertical on. And I would agree based upon the traditional things that we've been taught and the traditional things that we see and learn from. But what if I did that? 28 by 10. Well, I know for a fact that if this were going in a magazine, the magazine rules and requirements would say, it's way too small in the frame. If I publish that, even if I put it on half the page vertically in a magazine, it's going to be really small. People can't really see that. That's going to be too tiny. I can't use it as a cover because it's too tiny. I can't. Well, I'm saying that we stop just thinking about things according to the rules for magazines and calendar photography, which fortunately and unfortunately, we use those because that's what the world seems to be trained on. But I'm saying there's different requirements, and if you shoot differently, you get different results and you have different places for your images to live. So that may look like a whole lot of negative space, but look at how nice it looks in that office where we have a big wall. I don't want to have a big, busy image there. But I think that looks beautiful with a negative space. It's a nice color block for this wall without being distracting. The boathouse, when you enlarge this for 6 feet or so, the boathouse ends up being big enough that you absolutely know what it is and where it is. Maybe not where, but definitely the what. And it is in California, north of the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. But anyhow, doing this negative space now works in that particular scene. Which leads me to rule number 4, the negative space. So many times I've had people, I've watched judging in competitions, or you hear people say, oh, that has too much negative space, yada, yada, yada. And they may be absolutely correct for the situation. And the situation most often is, would it look good in a magazine and calendar? And if you look back in time for how a lot of these rules, especially around wildlife and nature, have gotten to be, it's because the magazines require certain things. The calendars require certain things, things that are filling the frame, colorful, high impact, tack sharp, action, all these things they require. Well, that's a requirement to get people to pick the magazine up off the desk or off the shelf at the bookstore or out of the mailbox and look at it and read it and be engaged. Those pictures need to suck you in. But I don't need action pictures in my living room to suck me in. I want peaceful things in my living room. I want things that work in the color palette that is my living room and so forth. We'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. But avoiding too much negative space has been a no-no for so long. And I'm saying, oh, it's an it depends kind of situation. So if I were to take pictures and print them in a magazine relatively small, this is a fake page that I made, but if I were to do that, these pictures hardly jump off the page. They have a little more negative space in them, not even a lot, just a little. And that isn't going to make me pick up that magazine. I can hardly see what those animals are when they're that small in a magazine. So the magazine requirements tell us to fill the frame, and then they try to make the pictures bigger in the magazine because anything small has no impact, and anything small in the frame has even less impact. And so if it's a picture like this, that's better for a magazine, right? That fills the frame, looks great. It's high impact because of the lighting and bears are always a good subject. This one, even though it doesn't completely fill the frame, the water, the texture, the seaweed, the kelp at the bottom here is a beautiful color. All of that really fills the frame. That fills the frame, high impact, action, drama, all those things that magazine photos love. Same with this one with the bear and her cub interacting. Those are great. The bats in Madera Canyon, this is part of my hummingbird workshop, but we also photograph the bats. And all of that is very fun in filling the frame. That eagle definitely fills the frame. The kittiwakes fill the frame more or less. And all of that stuff has been deemed, good quality. It's colorful, it's high impact, it fills the frame, all those things. Great magazine rules, great magazine potential photos. But if we break that rule, we are augmenting what we already know with a whole bunch of new options that people aren't thinking about. So this avoid too much negative space. For a picture like this, if I were to submit that into competition, they would probably tell me, nope, you have too much negative space and you have to rethink it. And then you would probably go and crop it like that. And that, I agree, could be very nice for a competition. But so is this, just not for the competitions that we typically are thinking about, because this is more of a magazine shot, maybe than this because there's too much negative space here. The only way a magazine might use this is if they put text all over the place up here, and then that kind of detracts from the picture. But this negative space in this bedroom works great. I need this big picture over this bed in this big wall. I need that. If I put something super busy up here or filling the frame, can you imagine a crane or two filling the frame in here? They'd be gigantic. It would be terrifying to go to bed. But something simple with a lot of negative space fills the wall up here. But this is just a color block. It just adds some impact on the wall, but still maintains that peacefulness, that spacious feeling that the whole bedroom has. It's not wrong in that case. Something like this. This is in where was I? I was in Florida, or no, Georgia capturing this. And this is a high key image. This is not something I photograph and cut out and stick on a white background. We're actually overexposing. This whole area behind here was a much bigger sand dune that was reflecting the white light even stronger. And I used a little bit of overexposure to create a high key image. So I think that looks beautiful there. But a magazine or calendar or competition might say that this has too much negative space. And I say it depends. It isn't an absolute that something does or does not have too much negative space. It depends on where it's going to live. And sometimes we're just not thinking of the origins of the rules that we're using and whether or not that image is appropriate for wherever it's supposed to live. We're also not taking into context the rest of the setting. So in a living room, this looks beautiful. I have a beautiful green wall. I've got this nice white sofa. This wide aspect ratio picture works really well in that setting. But if I just took it on its own, people might not think so much about that. Same with this. This is one of my favorite trees in Yellowstone National Park. And it's a really hard tree to get to because there isn't a great place to park and you gotta walk a ways. And but yet I love it. It's like a hobbit tree. I just think it's so neat. And so this tree kind of fills the frame. I did it in a wider aspect ratio, but it fills the frame. But if I were to do this to it, many people would say there's way too much negative space. You got to crop down. And I would agree based upon what we've learned so far in our photography journey and what rules have, been told and the idea that many of these images you're essentially training people up by doing competitions and instruction and all this stuff to shoot for magazines and calendars. And in that case, this looks way too empty, but it looks phenomenal here. We need that negative space. That room needs some breathing room. I have a tree that is the same color or close to the furniture in the room. I'm picking up some of the white in the carpet and the white on the walls over here on the left by the window, and yet it still fills the space. If I cropped really tight with that image and did that tree in the previous image, I should do that. I should add this to this. But if I did it the other way, that tree is going to look huge. If we cropped to kind of fill the frame and then blew it up, it's going to look overpowering in this room. You really need something more proportionate there. Or this image here. Again, I love doing high key photography where we have these very light, beautiful, soft images with typically pure white backgrounds. But if I entered this into a competition, the judges are probably going to say, you know what, you should crop it something like this. Fill that frame, let that bird shine. And I'm saying fair enough. If that were going into a magazine, yeah, I could see an 8 by 10 aspect ratio vertical crop or maybe even a horizontal. I get it. But when it's hung in this room, if I had that cropped shot and then blew it up to fill the space, it's going to be way too huge. That bird is going to be terrifying the poor person sleeping in the bed. So it really does depend on where an image lives. And there aren't absolutes when it comes to these rules, but I so feel like we've been trained up in a certain way. We kind of forgot these other situations occur. So that then leads me to rule number three. Your histogram should show a mountain in the middle. So a lot of these classic rules that we've heard, and I don't know if any of you in the room have heard that rule, either in the room or in the chat window. If you have, just acknowledge that with a little comment, or raise your hand if you're in the presentation room. Has anybody heard that room? Or heard that phrase? Your histogram should show a mountain in the middle. Anybody at all?
Couple here.
All right. And I'm seeing a few here as well in the chat room that have heard that rule. And this is such an interesting rule. And I have taught, gosh, a lot of classes over the years and a lot of workshops. And I've had people when we're out in the scene, whatever the scene is, and they're telling me, I can't get my histogram to be in the middle. Like when I shoot for this exposure, my histogram is, not the mountain in the middle. And I'll have to often tell them that's really good because that's not at all what we're going for. And they kind of look at me perplexed. And I said, yeah, that's a great rule for many traditional landscape pictures, but it's not at all a great rule if we're doing high key or low key or silhouettes or anything that requires something other than a mountain in the middle. So your histogram really should reflect what you envision for the shot, not just adhering to a rule of the mountain in the middle. And so here's a couple of examples here. So here's a picture of a photographer photographing something in Alaska. She was on my workshop a while back. And this is actually the histogram for this picture. So you can see it looks like a range of mountains in the middle. It's not necessarily perfectly a mountain in the middle, but I have not touched either end of my histogram with any data. So there's no pure blacks and there's no pure whites here. The blacks are close because the camera is black and there might be a couple little dark shadows in here somewhere, but essentially it's not hitting either side. It's not clipping the edges. And clipping tends to mean it looks like you've literally taken a scissors and cut off the information on the right or left side of the histogram. So this does fit that mountain in the middle description. That's great. And if you're not familiar with histogram, I think many are, but just in case you're not, a histogram is just a bar graph. And it has, if this picture had, let's just like exaggerate for a minute. If this picture had millions of colors, which it might, but millions of colors in it, and we had to take all those millions of colors and kind of group like with like until we had 256 buckets that we put all those colors in. That's going to be your histogram. So these lines are 256 lines in the bar graph, and each of them represent a band of color and the height represents how many pixels of that color are in your image. And that's what it tells you. So in case you haven't had a good explanation of a histogram, there's a quick one, but a workable one for you. But it doesn't mean we always have to adhere to that mountain in the middle phraseology. In fact, it can go absolutely against what we're trying to do. Here might work very well with this kind of picture. Or this kind of picture where we have a landscape and everything fits nicely in the middle. We don't have anything clipping on the left or on the right hand side. Lovely. That means I don't have any pure blacks or pure whites in here. And that's okay. And typically we look for those things because they're considered the perfect exposure. It doesn't overexpose highlights or shadows, like this picture here in Alaska. Even my lightest whites are not overexposed. My shadows, there's some pretty deep dark ones in here, but there's nothing that is pure black or pure white in that image. And that's considered, the perfect exposure, but I don't think it is. There's my histogram for this. It is for this picture. That's great. That's a great rule. But it's not for certain other ones. And so when I look at these images, I'm like, yes, there's times when I want the mountain in the middle. There's the one for this one. But there's times you don't. And so there's times you adhere to the histogram rules, and there's times to not adhere to those rules. And the rule being, keeping the mountain in the middle. So here's a picture of a verbena. And I have some blacks that are clipped, and I have some whites that are clipped. Sorry, this is the red channel. This is all the colors. But essentially, I have dark areas that are pure black. And you can see that that occurs because all of these are clipping on the left-hand side with a little slight exception of the green. And then I have the white tips on here that are overexposed because it's in the sun and the yellow's been faded out. It's lost detail. It's gotten too saturated. And you can see the red channel over here, which is influenced, yellow is influenced by red. All the colors in this picture are made up of blue, green, and red. And that is clipped over on the right-hand side. And what that means is there's no data, there's no detail in the red channel in certain areas. So I got to pay attention to that. I could underexpose that and help correct that, but that's a problem. Same with this egret here. Now, this egret, I think it's actually a little blue heron, not an egret. But all this area in here is pure white. There's no feather detail here. You can see a little feather detail down here. You can see a little up here, a little here, but nothing in the middle. And so if I looked at my histogram, it's clipped on the right-hand side. All my brights are really bright in that area, and I don't have detail. And a judge would ding us for that, and rightfully so. We should have detail in that bird. If I darken it, you do get a little bit more detail. So if I pull my exposure down in camera and retake the shot, I now can see more feather detail everywhere. And you can see the histogram has moved away from the edge. Okay, so I'm explaining all of that just so that we can break the rule. But there are times when we never should adhere to those histogram rules. And I put the rules in air quotes, but I have often heard them quoted and people abide by them. We have to really watch what we say because people will take it wholeheartedly and think, oh, that's something I should never do, or that's something I should always do. And there are very few things in life that are always or always nevers, right? There are very few things. And so if I shot with the mountain in the middle, or that's the goal, with a picture like this, in this picture, I have not quite clipped my blacks, but it's very close. I have a little dip here, and then I have a lot of darks and midtones, which are the background for this silhouette. And then I have a little blip on the right-hand side, which is this light part of the sun. I can't shoot with a mountain in the middle and capture a silhouette. I actually need this little gap here, and it shows up in everything except the blue channel. But that gap is really important. That gives me the silhouette. That separates the dark thing from the light things and literally creates the silhouette for you. So that's not an always. Or this one here, where I have the silhouette of the bird. I have a beautiful big gap here because I have very light skies and very dark birds. That is necessary to create a silhouette. And I'm showing you this just because so many people have kind of taken it as gospel to use that histogram in the middle, and then they're frustrated when they can't get the images. Like they see an image they like, and then they're like, but my histogram's all wrong. I need to fix it. And I'm like, no. You don't need to fix it. This is exactly what you're going for. So I get a little frustrated with the photographers who say always and nevers. Or high key imagery, such as this one here. If I look at my histogram, that's what that looks like. Most photographers, if I just showed you the histogram, would look at that and go, what in the heck are you photographing? That can't be right. But it is right. It's one of the high key images. Or this one here with eagles, another high key image, high key shot in a high key style. And no, this is not eagles that I cut out and put on a white background. This is all done in camera. But there's my histogram for it. Very different from most of the histograms you see. I am intentionally blowing out my highlights. I want to do that in the background, not on the bird, but on the background. Or this here, low key. This is an ibis. I photographed this about a stop under exposed. The sun, if you can imagine this scene, I don't have the original with me to show you, but if you can imagine this scene, I have a white ibis in full sun later in the day, not golden hour yet, but getting there. Full sun on this ibis. And then I have dark mangroves, which are, if you haven't seen mangroves, they are saltwater plants. They grow in brackish and saltwater, and they're very dense and they have dark leaves. And so all those mangroves were behind. If I took those mangroves at an exposure of 0 and the ibis is going to be overexposed, and the mangroves are going to be probably fairly correctly exposed. And that's going to look like a mess. So I had to underexpose this egret by a full stop to get the detail in the feathers to show up and darken that image enough. Well, when I did so, the mangroves just went black. There wasn't enough light on those mangroves to have them still show up when we underexposed by a stop. So then I converted this to black and white, and I toned down this highlight a little bit just so that your eyes stayed up here. It noticed this, but it didn't get distracted by this. But all of this is just mangroves, but they're too dark because they don't show up anymore in the picture. I did not select the subject and make the background go black. I see some people doing that online, and you really need the right lighting conditions to have a true low-key image. And this is one of those. But I do see a lot of that, both in high key and low key, where people cut things out and stick them on white or black backgrounds or make the background go white or black. There's usually still some issues and kind of some tells with that, but it's okay. So here's your histogram, and it looks ridiculous. Most people would think you've lost the plot if you had a histogram like that and you showed them that, but it's perfect for that image. Same with this one here, perfect for that image. So I really want you to consider breaking that rule of, the mountain in the middle, thinking your histograms only should look certain ways, and not thinking that there are times when there should be all white, pure white in your images or pure black. Don't worry about your printer and whether or not they can print white ink. You can find printers that will do that. And you can also use just the paper in the background. Like there's no law that says every inch of that paper has to be with white ink or black ink or whatever it might be. You can also print on different substrates. I print on metal, and one of the things you can opt in on metal with a high key image, I'll go back to a high key just to find one to show you. There's a high key. One of the things you can do, print on metal and ask the print shop for anything that is pure white, meaning FFF, FFF, or 255, 255, 255 in your red, green, blue channel when you're editing. Anything that's pure white, be printed with the metal showing through or the wood showing through or whatever your substrate is. That is awesome to look at. And so, like, it gives you all these creative options. But anyhow, let's go back to rule number 2. Never photograph birds against a white sky. This is one that I was told by a photography elder, if you will. I was out in the field. I was probably about 14, and I was pointing my camera that I had just gotten. I got a Canon A1 when I was 14, and I was pointing it at some bird that was silhouetted against a gray sky, those overcast skies. And he said, never photograph birds against a white or gray sky. And I was like, okay. I didn't question it. I just took the rule as gospel, so to speak. And it took me about 40 years before I broke that rule. But when we say never photograph birds against a white sky, this is typically why. And this is not a blue sky. This is actually a really gray, overcast sky in Arizona, which we rarely get, but it was. And look at how dark and murky my owl is. And so they often would see a picture like this, where your camera is trying to give the sky some color and underexposing because there's so much sky and it wants to put some color into that sky, so it underexposes that sky, and therefore your bird gets underexposed and it looks like crud. And I'm saying this is now my favorite way to photograph. So I love looking for subjects that are underlit and skies that are gray. It's like I've come full circle here with that. Why? Well, the images typically in the past have looked flat or underexposed. The images haven't popped when people photograph them against gray skies. Or it's considered to be poor or amateur technique. It lacks color, contrast, vibrance, all those important things for magazines. So people were looking for images more like this. This is scarlet tanager, and the background is blurred out trees in the spring, and there was a red brick lighthouse behind this as well. And I just framed it up in the bokeh, all that soft blurry background kind of gave me this beautiful mauve image, which was unexpected and really kind of cool. But again, not a white background, not a white background with this Parula warbler, not a bright white background with my hummingbirds or my cactus wren or the eagles or anything else that I'm shooting. And that's been deemed preferable for the last, at least for me, for 40 years. But if we break that rule, we really can come up with some cool stuff. And I have really been doing a lot of high key lately. And if there is one genre of photography, if you had to pick one thing that you would shoot for the rest of your life, it would be high key. And that's because it introduces more creativity when it's exposed properly. Your images aren't just for magazines anymore. They can go in magazines, but there are so many other places that we can use images, but you have to design for the requirements of that place. And in a lot of interiors, high key really works well. It helps you use the crappy light really well. So you can go out on the overcast days, on the rainy days, on the days that aren't perfect. You can shoot at blue hour and all these times where we normally tend to avoid as photographers. And it maximizes your opportunity to use those conditions and still get phenomenal images. So here's an example, very simple one, of a high key image with a crane, sandhill crane. And that high key image the high key look tends to use abnormally bright exposures. I put bright light here. Actually, the better term I should change it to is bright exposures. It'll wash out most of the shadows and detail in an image. And if you looked at the histogram for this crane, that is what it looks like, which is comical compared to what we're used to seeing. And so your shadows, a little bit of midtones, and then it spikes up at the highlights. That's what we're seeing in this image. Very few shadows, a few more midtones. There's a lot of negative space that's white, and that's why your highlights spike way up and your histogram. And so I am here in Arizona on a rare cloudy day. I live in the wrong state to do high key, I have to say. I love high key, and we get about 3 days a year that it actually can work. But here's what I'm photographing is this juvenile black crowned night heron. And so I'm adjusting my settings because I want to overexpose this scenario. I have a bird that's much darker than the background. I have no directional light, which is a huge piece of the high key puzzle. I don't want side light or front light or harsh backlight. I don't need a sun that is full sun. I want it all behind the gray clouds. So I have this soft box in the sky. And then I'm trying to zero in on the bird. I have a pretty clean background overall, but you can see this bird looks a little dark. And that is just kind of the nature of the light and what it does with our camera. I have to correct for that. I have to overexpose in that case. So I'm kind of waiting for the bird to do something interesting and then take my pictures. And when I do, and I do my color correction, that is what it looks like. And by color correction, I mean that when we shoot on overcast skies, it tends to take on a blue tone. And so I've color corrected for that. Whether you do it in RAW, when you're processing later, or whether you do it in camera and put your white balance to shade or cloudy, I don't care. Or use, some temperature in the Kelvin temperatures. I've corrected for that. So the bird gets back its kind of warm color. Here is an alder flycatcher. Again, lots of negative space, but it works really well for high key. Or this one here of a bear. This was a miserable day, and the bear looks beautiful in high key. Or this eagle. Or my hummingbird. So I captured that. I didn't even know I had it. Another reason to not delete until you get your pictures on the computer. I did not even know I captured that until I got it off the camera. But the wasp was flying away from a feeder that's off camera. The bird was flying in. They both startled each other, and that was the look that I got. And you could try that a million times and probably never get that again. So I was pretty excited about that. Eagles in Alaska, high key. Owl, the one that I showed you in the very beginning. I just did its head, tilted my camera to diagonal, and I love the high key look with him. Cactus wren here in Arizona, high key. And so, why do I want to do that? Well, again, high key is often preferred in interiors because it is a simple color palette. So that there is a reason why that image looks good in that space. Simple color palettes, they tie in together. It works really well. What wouldn't work well here is, a scarlet macaw flying through with 99 million colors with, flowers in the background or what have you. Those are beautiful images, but they very rarely work well in an interior. I'm not saying you can't hang your favorite images on the wall, but what I'm saying is from a design aesthetic, that is never going to be picked by someone because it matches the room really well. And I used to do a lot of art shows and, well, not a lot, but several art shows. And I kept getting so disappointed because I'd print my best work and I'd, print it up big and people would come by in droves and talk about it and they love it and it was beautiful, but they wouldn't buy it. And I mean, this was my best stuff. This was the stuff I won awards with, that I've been printed in magazines, and it just wouldn't sell. And it wasn't until I'm going to say it was around maybe 2016 or so that I had done a few art shows with mediocre success. And I really started thinking, why? Why is this not happening? And I kept thinking, well, the judges say it's good, and the competitions say it's good, and the magazines say it's good. Why are people not picking it up? And then I went back to my floral design career. So I told you I was going to come back to this. So as a floral designer for 15 years, I did the weddings and the funerals and all that stuff. But I ended up working a lot with interior designers that were in kind of a higher end town where the florist was that I worked. And so I would learn a lot with them about room composition. So room composition or design is very similar to photography competition. You got to suck people in, you got to give them a focal piece, you have some accent things, but it all has to work together visually. Well, I got thinking about it, and I would make huge floral pieces, like things that would be 8 feet long. huge floral pieces that were permanent for these high-end homes and accent pieces as well. But what I realized is all those flowers tied in with the colors in the room. So if they had, I'll pick some random colors. If they had burgundy and green as, two tones in their room, well, then my flowers would pull in those tones. I didn't put rainbow colored flowers in the room. I put tones that worked with the room. Or if they had a really soft color palette like this bedroom. So it's taupes and whites and grays and those kinds of things. Well, that picture on the wall works perfectly in that room. So I had to rethink what I was doing and think about how can I photograph things that would work well in a theoretical living room with these colors. And I would look at what color trends are and try to design things around that and photograph things around that and process things around that. And that ended up working much better for me. But that's when I realized these rules that we've been operating off of, when people say wildlife photography doesn't sell, it's like it does. But you have to think about it in the right context. You have to think about the requirements for a room that it needs to live in, not a magazine. And those are very different things. And so this picture, for example, again, another high key with the white background. But if you look at this raven, the raven actually has a little bit of a blue tone to it. And if you look at the pine tree isn't exactly the green pine color that we think of. It has a little bit more of a like a light olive and a straw color to it. Well, if I were to submit that in competition, a judge would probably ding me saying that my white balance is off. But actually, that picture works perfectly in this room because I have those straw colors. I have a little bit of this tone in the sofa that I wanted to bring out in here. And that simplifies the color palette, and that is beautiful together. But it might not work very well in a competition, but that's not where it's designed to live. So you kind of got to stay in the lane that you're working with and design for that. If it's competition, design for that. If it's something going to a living room or office or, you know, lobby of a hotel or a hospital or whatever, design for that. And the very last rule that I have for you, and it kind of ties into what I was just alluding to, wildlife photography doesn't sell in interiors. And so I want to dive in a little deeper with this. And it is not true that wildlife doesn't sell, although it's a common thing that's been said. In fact, I just read a Reddit. I don't know if anybody uses the app Reddit, Reddit. It's a great app. I love reading the things that come up in that app. But someone literally just said, does anybody make their living in wildlife photography anymore? And there were lots of comments, and I was excited because I got to say, yes, I do. And I sell prints and I teach and I, consult and I do all these different things. But most people were saying no, because wildlife photography doesn't sell because magazines are dead and, nobody wants it in their living room. Well, the reason why they don't is it's designed for the wrong end result. It's designed for a magazine, not a living room. So images like this is a panning style shot. Slow shutter, 13th of a second, bird coming into a cornfield. I wouldn't know all this is corn. It doesn't look like corn stalks. I wouldn't know that this is the trees, the mesquite trees in the background. It's just a soft, pretty image, and it works well in that interior and it pulls in the color palette. So most people have little success selling wildlife because the photography rules that we are almost universally operating off of were designed around the magazine and calendar market, not the home interior market. So we're not thinking like a consumer of art for the home. We're thinking like a consumer of our work for a magazine. And nothing wrong with that. But again, I'm augmenting what you know. I'm not saying throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are reasons those rules exist and they're wonderful. We just have to learn new ways. It's like saying I drive on the right side of the road and that's the only way there is. And it's like, well, you go to Europe and, in England, they drive on the quote unquote wrong side of the road. Neither are incorrect, but one is very wrong for a certain set of conditions, right? I don't want to drive on the left side of the road in the US. So, if I gave you a new assignment and I said, all right, you're going to go out into the field and instead of just looking around at wherever you land and taking pictures of whatever you see, if I said, here's the room, now go and take a picture that would replace this picture here. And I want it to fit in that room. I want it to look like it was designed to be a part of that room. It changes the game and how you think and what you'd think about shooting. So this image has a lot of negative space. This room has a lot of negative space. So I probably wouldn't want to go and fill the frame with something very textural or busy, or, certainly I don't want a lion catching a gazelle in here. Like that's not the vibe. Um, Thinking about what the vibe is and what you would shoot is a very interesting challenge. Or this here. If I said this is the room and you have a client that wants to replace this painting with something else of your photography in this room. Well, first of all, this is not a traditional aspect ratio. It's a little wider than the traditional aspect ratio. Second of all, you have a white sofa, ivory walls, some gray furniture. We have some black accents. What would you put here? And you don't need to answer me today, but the challenge is really interesting to think about what is something that makes a statement yet isn't busy. I already have enough busy things going on in the decor here. Yes, technically we could get rid of some of those things, but let's just say the only thing they wanted to do is put a different piece here. What would you shoot and how do you do it? And it creates a very different sequence of thoughts for people, and you start to see the world very differently. Or this here. It's very rare that you get a room that is loaded with color that you could put a super colorful image on the wall. Now, this is a painting, of course. But if it were a photograph and I said they want to ditch this painting and they want to go with your photograph, okay, maybe now you could sort of get away with, a scarlet macaw or some kind of very colorful bird, or maybe the really colorful fish that you see in the underwater photography, or a big field of flowers with a lot of color. But it's very rare to see this vibrant of a color palette in a living room. And so, here's your chance for the more colorful things. But typically, people aren't designing with that much color. Or this one here, we have opposites on the color wheel with the pink and green. So we have a beautiful color harmony here. But if your clients said, hey, this is my living room, I want to replace these prints with some of yours. What would you shoot that would go here as a trio that really tie in together and pull in those colors? So now you got to think about what subject you'd photograph. Is it flowers? Is it an abstract? I don't know, but it's really an interesting exercise to think about. Here's where the picture has to live. Now go shoot it. Because most of the time we are thinking of, let me go find a picture and maybe I'll like it on my wall or on the competition wall or wherever you think it might go or on the wall on Facebook. But it's very different to come in here and be the one to design a picture or a trio of pictures that works with the interior. Very different subjects and mindset, and it's a challenge. But it's a challenge I actually love, and I encourage camera clubs to do this as a challenge. You can go online and Google, living room interiors, or go watch the HGTV channel and look at what they are hanging on the wall. And it's not pictures of scarlet macaws and, I don't know, your vermilion flycatchers or things like this. It is all very subtle and simplistic, typically, abstract very often. It's just an interesting way to rethink how you shoot photography. But even these simple high-key botanicals, now they're in these pinks and mauves, which is not at all what we would typically shoot high-key botanicals in. So they've been color graded. That's okay. But if you had to shoot something for that wall and they wanted to take these down and put your picture there or pictures, what would you shoot? It's a very different exercise to work backwards, but it can be really fun and challenging. And so the whole idea of magazines and the things that we have been told to do, not wrong for a magazine, not wrong for competition, but if you want to expand your world, you know, these ideas that the image has to have impact and jump off the wall. Well, I picked one that has all the same colors as this lobby. But oh my gosh, if I walked into the lobby and I saw that, I'd be terrified. Like that does not fit that vibe at all, right? Even though all the colors work. It's a simple color palette. That fits a magazine great. You saw it in the magazine earlier. Not on the wall though. So that's a no. This one could be a maybe because this room is so bland. Maybe it needs a punch of color here, but honestly, it feels too strong to me in this environment. I would rather have something more serene, a little more organic feeling, and not all these bright, bold colors. If I did have to put it in here, I would probably change a couple of pillows to or some accents to match this color, and I'd add some more bold black pieces, such as maybe a tall floor vase or some accents in black on the wall or maybe even like wrought iron sconces or something, a black mantle, something to kind of make the whole room feel a little more bold, and then it might work. But I call that a maybe at best. But it would be a great magazine shot, right? High impact, high color, something that draws people in. So I say maybe, but it's a strong maybe. Um, Same with the action here. We talk about action and getting the animals doing things, not just standing there or sitting there or whatever. But even though all this fits the right color palette, it just doesn't feel like a picture you'd normally see in the interior of a home or lobby or anything like that. It's a little bit too Nat Geo for the space. A lot of times people like softer lines, simpler pictures, more subtle color palettes. So I'm going to say no. And also, the cropping. We have a great big huge dolphin. It might actually work better if it wasn't cropped in quite as tight. And I showed you this one already, but the cactus wren is North America's largest wren. Well, we've taken North America's largest wren here and made it into North America's largest wren picture. It doesn't fill this space in the right way. It's really big, and it's not the right thing for this room. A lot of negative space and a simpler subject would look way better than this gigantic wren. But in a magazine, that'd be fantastic. And so we shouldn't always fill the frame. It just doesn't work in interiors. We have subject background separation. That's a big rule in competitions where you're photographing nature. And yes, we've got beautiful subject separation here, but the environment in which it lives, it just doesn't work. It's not the same color palette. It feels a little too realistic, a little too Nat Geo for this home. So no.
Gee.
This eagle, I think this is funny. It's like a ginormous eagle head on the wall. All the right colors, but it fills the frame, which is what the magazines want, but you can see it just doesn't work in this space. And so that's a no. And one of my favorites is, and I love doing this. I take people to go and see bears every summer in Alaska. I am there for 8 weeks worth of workshops in the summer. And it's a lot of fun. Darcy's been there with me. The bears are awesome, but I wouldn't take a bear image of it ripping apart a bloody salmon and put it in my bedroom over my bed. Like that is so not what I want to go to sleep to. That is not the feeling that most bedrooms, would have. There's some other pictures that we probably shouldn't put on the bedroom wall either, but you get my drift with the bear. It's just the wrong vibe. I wouldn't put it over my sofa either or in my hotel lobby. Unless maybe it was a hotel in Alaska, I could kind of understand that, but a very specific situation. So I'm going to say no to that. So if you think about how people pick out room decor, that can help you understand how to shoot for pictures that are going to be hung in a room. So simple color palettes, use color harmony. You want the vibe of the photograph to fit the vibe of the room or the vibe that the client wants in the room. I do a lot of consulting when I send a picture out to someone. We talk about the vibe that they want, the color palettes. I size it according to where it's going to live so they get the right size. There's a whole lot to that, and I do that. So, one of my missions in my photo artistry workshops is to never photograph a sandhill crane against a blue sky again. I see them everywhere. I see them in every competition that I've judged. I see them, on Facebook. And here's my nice flight picture of a sandhill crane against a blue sky. And I just refuse to add more to that already oversaturated type of image. There's just too many of them. And so we go photograph cranes against a gray sky. And in this case, I've taken the cranes. I've added a texture to this image as well. The color palette is simple and it's in those non-conventional aspect ratios that we talked about earlier. This is more of a 10 by 20 or so. And I think this looks beautiful in this space. But a lot of times people just don't think that that would make a good image on its own. If I submitted that to a competition, I don't know that it would do exceptionally well, but it does work exceptionally well in this case. And I can also take it, maybe I break it into a diptych. Or maybe I even do one, two, just two of those four birds. But if I were to take a picture like this or this and submit it to a competition, nobody would say, oh my gosh, that's an amazing photo. Because we're kind of trained up to think of amazing photos as being amazing photos for magazines and calendars. But it really works well in this space. So does this one. It ties in the colors in the room. Or this one, it ties in the colors in this beach home. Three black neck stilts, high key, the yellow in the back with some reflecting cottonwoods in the water. Just a very simple image, but it works really, really well in this space. Of course, you've seen this one already, but it works well in that space. Simple color palette. The color palette in this one works well in the room. The color palette in the original image, it was very harsh. And so I overexposed it. I lifted the shadows. I made it much softer. The contrast ratio is much flatter. And then I even hand painted a few of the flowers digitally in Photoshop just to give them a little more emphasis and streaks. And I really liked that. And I think it looks beautiful in that space. But I don't know if I hung that on a competition wall and put it up on some of the display areas where we do competition, if that would win anything, because people would look at it and go, oh, it's way too overexposed and that's not right and that doesn't look good and so on and so forth. But in this room, it looks great. And lastly, our last rule that we should adhere to is the ethics rule. And sometimes I feel like we forget about this in our earnest to get great pictures. But we really should photograph ethically. And that means, especially this time of year, we're getting into nesting season. Be ethical, be thoughtful about the things that we're photographing. Life is hard enough for our nature. And I just feel like I've seen way too many things in my day that I would not do as a photographer. And there's a lot of gray area in being ethical, but my gosh, give animals a break. If you need to get closer, get a longer lens or move very quietly and gently. Don't disturb the birds. Just leave things be and, live and let live, so to speak. You can read a lot more in the North American Nature Photography Association. They have guidelines and kind of decision criteria on your ethics. And I just suggest people take a look at that. Sometimes, you know, we sort of gradually move away from those standards. And I just think animals have a hard enough time as it is. Give them a little grace as you photograph them. And lastly, if you are interested in joining my newsletter at all, I will put the link in the chat room, and you can also take your phone camera and hover over this QR code, and you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter. I don't spam. I don't even email that often, but if you want to join anything that I'm doing, um, that is where to go. I will also mention, I know this is a little far from you, but I am going to be at Photoclave, which is the Northern California conference. I know I'm not saying this right, of photographers. And I'm going to be at their conference in March. It's called Photoclave. And if I just escape out of here, I can show you the website and pull that up. Let's see here. Photoclave. Nope, that's not it. Hold on. Photoclave. There. There. Photoclave for photography conference, and I will put the link in the chat window as well. That is March 20th through the 23rd. I'm going to be teaching a multitude of classes and field workshops there. If you can make it up there, it's great. It's in Santa Cruz, which is about a half hour southwest of San Jose. And if anybody's interested, come on up and be glad to meet you and check it out. I think there is still space available, so go ahead and check out the registration and the schedule. And on that note, I will stop sharing and it's all you guys. I'm happy to help with questions or discussion or send you on your way if you're ready to go home. Whatever you need.
Questions? Let me open the chat just to, so I can.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate the thumbs up.
You guys have any questions?
What are some of your thoughts on this? How did this sit with you as far as the reasons why I'm suggesting breaking these rules? Any commentary, any discussion about it?
I I liked everything you said. I tend to be kind of on the rule breakers. I'm like, likes but 8 by 10s. That can't be right. Um, and I've seen some of your stuff in the past and stuff that you post, and so I had tried more high key, and that was fun to try. So if you guys haven't tried it, you should try more high key.
I'm with
Um,
you on that.
and the soft tones for walls and things, I think about that too. Yes, Tony.
Like the creative use of space. Yes.
He likes your use of negative space to complement.
Thank you. Thank you. I love negative space. It allows things to breathe, especially when you print it big on a wall. The negative space just works in so many cases. Not in a magazine so much, sometimes, but mostly on the interior walls. They look beautiful. Thanks for that compliment. Diana, do you have a question? Can you unmute?
Yeah, unmute.
There
Yes.
you go.
I'm curious, since you
Boy.
are trying to
What?
match images. Oh, you can hear me, right? Since
Yes,
you are trying to match images in interior space, do you start with an image that you adjust in editing in order to accomplish that?
definitely. Definitely. That law office that I showed you was a great example. Sorry, I have a cat and I have cat hair on my face somehow. That law office is a great example. And how I tend to approach it is, and I'll say this, I don't have a lot of images for sale on my website right now. That's something I'd like to do. I'm also a little bit picky about where they live and how they live. And so at that law office, I spoke to the two lawyers. They just moved into that office. We had a lot of different rooms we were designing, and they had a budget that they want to spend over time. So we had to kind of start with some, and then they were going to add more as we go along. Um, but first of all, getting to know them. What do you guys like? What are you about? What kinds of things get you fired up? And long story short, they were from Phoenix. They went to Arizona State University. Arizona State University is a saguaro. They definitely wanted saguaros in the picture. And then I presented several different options for them that I felt would work in the conference room. And one of them is the one that's my background. And I said, here are several options. Here's my favorite, and here's why. And I had color graded this picture to work with the tones in the room. And then I said, you're in a conference room. And although there's a glass wall on one side, you look out and all you see is the other side of the hallway. Like, 5 feet away is another white wall. Conference rooms can feel sort of claustrophobic after a while. I said, I want you to have something where you feel like you have some depth and some room. And so we picked this layered, I'll move aside here for just a second, but we picked this layered picture. Um, this is a little bit of a cropped version, but the one that we used was a 8 foot wide version because it gave the room a feeling of depth and that you had space and it didn't feel so claustrophobic and yet it filled the space on the wall. We had another room where we did, you needed to add some color harmony. They have a definite blue in the office theme that we needed to work with. They weren't going to repaint the walls from whoever used that office beforehand. And so I had to incorporate that blue. So I used color harmony, which is orange, and we did sunrises. One guy was very much a morning person. He's like, I love sunrise. Okay, add some saguaros with the sunrise. And I even went and photographed a few things for that room that were specifically for that room. So used it as a assignment, if you will, and then had to come up with some things. So they had a lot of original stuff, but I really went about it with some thought. And it was a team effort. And then I had to do sizing that was the right size for the space. I did that with another client in Minnesota. He was building a brand new house. And he says, I have a few artists that I really love, and you're one of them. I want to hang 5 pieces in my house of yours. Let's go figure out what they are and where they go. And then, we went through, and he literally was like, it's a white wall right now, or a white, there were multiple rooms, but everything was just like contractor white until you painted it something else. So we got to really be creative with that process. And so that's how it's fun for me. I get to play a little bit interior designer, I get to play photographer, and most of all, I get to have creative fun with them and giving them something that is very personal and chosen by them, not just like, yeah, I like that picture, but designed for the space. And I enjoy doing that.
Very nice.
All right.
I think we really appreciate your speaking. It was amazing.
Thank you so much.
Gave us a lot to think about and lots of things to be rebels with. Just kidding.
I like being a little bit rebel, like,
So rebel photographer.
this is coming from the girl who's never even, knock on wood, had a speeding ticket. So I don't know exactly how rebel I am, but certain things I do like to bend those rules.
Yes.
Ah, my gosh. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was helpful. And, if there's anything else I can do, please let me know. And maybe I'll see you at Photoclave or down the road or at a future webinar. But I hope you have a wonderful evening. And again, thanks for making me a part of your evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you. Good night, everyone.